In fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum.
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
I will also immediately put in place a meaningful process for reviewing the cases for asylum. I will release children from cages.
How many children will have crossed illegally in 2021?
I believe that thus far, through October 31st, Senator, approximately 125,000 unaccompanied children have been transferred to the shelter and care of Health and Human Services.
The growing concern right now are the number of unaccompanied children that are flocking to the border and ending up in Customs and Border Protection custody because their facilities are more like jail cells and they are not suited for children. They are not child shelters. Last week, Customs and Border Protection had about 1,300 children in their custody. Yesterday, that number was 3,400. Now, under U.S. law, children are not supposed to be held for more than 72 hours.
Children as young as 2 years old are being smuggled across the U.S.-Mexico border without their parents. Almost 10,000 minors from Central America crossed the border illegally in February, nearly double the previous month's figures. The spike comes after a shift in U.S. border policy when President Joe Biden announced his administration would not bar unaccompanied minors from entering the United States. Reuters interviewed over a dozen self-identified smugglers who said some migrant children have even been used as a decoy for the cartel's drug trafficking operations.
This is a crisis of his own making. And by definition, just plain speak, basic English language definition, it is not an emergency.
I agree with AOC that we should get rid of DHS altogether.
That is not correct. I am not in favor of decriminalizing or not having consequence for. We have to keep. Let me just be very clear. We have to have a secure border. But I am in favor of saying that we're not going to treat people who are undocumented and cross the border as criminals. That's correct. That is correct.
I believe if someone crosses over the border, it is illegal, and you would decriminalize it.
I would not make it a crime punishable by jail. It should be a civil enforcement issue, but not a criminal enforcement issue.
Okay.
There should be, you got to play by the rules, but we can't treat people like criminals.
My name's Tim Ballard. I'm the founder of Operation Underground Railroad, which is an organization dedicated to fight human trafficking and child exploitation. Before that, spent 12 years as a special agent and undercover operator, mostly working child crimes and human trafficking investigations. The United States is generally acknowledged as the #1 consumer of child rape material, child exploitation material. So start doing the math and you think, okay, so we're the demand. There's kids who are vulnerable, who are taken, who are lured, who are kidnapped, and the market is the United States. How do we get kids into that market? And so when you start with that and you understand that there's cartels, so they make about $14 million a day in the business of getting kids and people into the United States. We have a policy that facilitates it. If you're in Nicaragua and you want to come to the United States, you paid a couple $1,000s to a smuggler. That smuggler will get you to the border and then hand a child to you. We've been down on the border. I worked there for 10 years. We've seen this. We know this is happening. And they put the child into the hands of this client and they say, just tell the Border Patrol that this is your kid. And they get in and then 72 hours later, they're released. And then they call a number, drop the kid off, and the kid's just recycled. Send them over, put them on a raft, push them over the river. And a Border Patrol agent will actually, it's not their fault, by the way, they're just following policy, but they actually facilitate the trafficking. They're like, oh, come here and come sit in this detention center. And now you just need anyone from the US to come in, easy to falsify paperwork claiming a familial relationship, right? Hey, little Miguel's my nephew. Well, there you go. There was a case that broke me. It was 2006 when one of the children that I had seen in the video we found coming across port of entry. The guy's name was Earl Buchanan. You can look him up. He was smuggling or trafficking these children, and he was actually producing child exploitation material with these children that he was getting and taking across the border. And I saw this child, and the child ran to me at one point and hugged me and said to me at 5 years old, "I don't belong here." His perfect English, because he's been basically raised by this monster who had him since he was a baby.
Desperation and frustration growing as groups flow into the U.S.
Children that are unaccompanied, they usually range from 7 to 13. And the smallest one is about 7, and he was by himself.
Constables don't have the authority to detain anyone. Instead, they direct them down the road to this Border Patrol staging area.
¿Y tiene familia aquí en Estados Unidos? Tía. Ana.
They vary from different ages. These are probably all the youngest that we have currently in custody. And these kids cross by themselves. We're starting to see younger and younger kids being brought over by their sponsors, by relatives, by grandparents, paying the fees to smuggle these kids into the country. I'm a father. I don't want to see that. As a Border Patrol agent, I didn't sign up for this.
After meeting with local leaders willing to provide housing for some of the unaccompanied minors already in Texas, President Obama dismissed calls to visit the border.
An incredibly dangerous situation, and it is unlikely that their children will be able to stay.
I have told this administration, and others have told this administration for years, that this was exactly what was going to happen.
What we saw does track what we saw in pictures taken in secret days before. Kids in chain link holding areas using foil blankets. They say the facility was not set up hastily to cope with a glut of immigrant children. They say it is a facility built for adult detainees, converted when the need arose to house hundreds of children.
Those cages that were shown, I think they were very inappropriate. They were built by President Obama's administration, not by Trump.
And not about locking children up, separating them from their parents. And I have to just say that we have to think about this issue in terms of real people. A mother who pays a coyote to transport her child through their country of origin, through the entire country of Mexico, facing unknown peril, to come here. Why would that mother do that?
These photos provided to PBS NewsHour by Congressman Henry Cuellar of Texas show adults and children bunched together on sleeping mats at a makeshift tent facility in Donna, Texas, operated by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. It comes amid an outcry from a bipartisan group of U.S. senators after they toured a border facility last Friday with Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Press were barred from the trip. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy said that he fought back tears while touring the facility.
The numbers are just continuing to grow, and there's no impedance for these children to be coming in.
The United States of America now is sending a message to those children. If you journey across the desert, you make a long and dangerous trip, we're going to let you in. You can come in, and we're not going to even give you a court date. So the administration right now, the Biden administration right now, is the one that's luring these children to the border with the promise of being able to get in. So
we are building safe, orderly, and humane ways to address the needs of vulnerable children.
President has not been down to the...
Okay, no. Has Kamala Harris been down to see the Biden cages, this facility? Yes or no?
The vice president was at the border.
Has she been down to see this facility? I know she went to El Paso. Has she seen the Biden cages?
They are not cages. And
what are these walls? Yes or no? Has Kamala Harris been down to see these detention facilities?
She has not.
When you become president, would you be committing to close immigration detention centers?
Absolutely, on day one. People are profiting off of the incarceration of other human beings, who in this case are children. On day one, we'll shut them down.
We are building safe, orderly, and humane ways to address the needs of vulnerable children.
Let's get these kids out of CBP custody, get them into HHS custody. We've got to treat this issue in a way that is reflective of our values as Americans and do it in a way that is fair and is humane.
Lawmakers urging the Biden administration to provide explanations for the disappearance of 85,000 migrant children.
Representative Juan Ciscomani has written a letter to the administration raising concerns about unaccompanied migrant children being handed over to adults and then failing to keep track of them.
Where are the babies? We still don't know.
Whistleblowers are revealing that the Biden administration is releasing young migrant children into the arms of adult supervisors who have not been properly vetted with a background check.
Each step of this process was vulnerable to human error, increasing the risk that a child could be lost in the system, which is terrible. You should be able to lose children in a government system as easily as in a Chuck E. Cheese ball pit. I'm sorry, we're going to have to call off the search, Mrs. Donaldson. Ralphie's lost to the balls now.
The New York Times is reporting the Biden administration's repeatedly ignored or missed warnings about a surge of migrant children as young as 12 working in factories across the United States.
I found children in every state in the country who are working dangerous, illegal, exploitative jobs. These are jobs in factories, in meat processing. And the Biden administration says, well, we had no idea about this. So my reporting has really been into what kind of warnings were missed. How is it possible that these children are everywhere in this country and the administration is saying, well, we didn't know? They were pointed to evidence multiple times. We are worried about these kids. We are worried these kids might be working in chicken processing.
But are being exploited and sexually abused. Is that a possibility? Because it seems like there is no checking in.
The fact is, the government at this point does not know what has happened to thousands and thousands of these children. There was all this pressure in the administration to move those kids out quickly because it was so visible when they were ending up sleeping on the floor, sleeping in these terrible conditions.
We'll give you a microphone.
And what happened after that with all these kids working was much less visible. You know, nobody's going to go and have a big newsreel about children who are working in the poultry plant because you can't get in there. And so it was sort of a trade-off, as it's been explained to me, between this very visible crisis where kids weren't moving out of the shelters quickly enough and this hidden crisis where kids are now working these terrible jobs and often sort of languishing in debt bondage. And these staffers who had to try to connect children with sponsors and move them out of shelters tell me that to them, this often felt worse than even during, child separation under Trump.
New pushback from the Trump administration after days of defense on immigration, sparked by a zero-tolerance policy rolled out recently.
If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you.
The White House argues the policy is a deterrent. And to Ana Ilis, who came from Mexico with her 2 young kids in March, it would have been.
No.
She says she would not have crossed the border if the policy had been in place then, and she knew her family would be separated. Children who are separated from their parents end up under the care of a government resettlement agency. An agency which recently acknowledged it could not track down about 1,500 of the roughly 7,600 kids it placed with families last year.
Where are these kids? Why don't we know where they are?
So we've got 206 children.
Legal Art is suing the government on behalf of parents separated from their children after crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. When the government records don't show a parent's phone number or address, they're designated as unreachable. With no contact information to go on, they turn to local lawyers and investigators, like Heriberto Pop.
Hemos hecho la búsqueda de más o menos 27 familias. Ya creciste mucho.
When Ronnie was deported, his daughter Haiti was still in detention.
Me acuerdo que cuando te llevé estabas pequeñita. Y para mirarte ya grande, una gran jovencita.
They will get here on their own as long as the government gives them permission to show up.
Against all odds, the judge agreed.
More vigorously vet sponsors of unaccompanied minors. DOL and HHS launched a new task force to heighten cooperation and better share information. We also called on Congress to provide the resources this administration has long requested to help us crack down on companies that exploit children for labor. The actions we've taken since February make clear that we will continue to investigate and hold companies accountable.
We are incredibly dedicated to the safety and security of those children.
Well, it doesn't appear so based on what we're reading today in the New York Times, what we're reading and seeing from numbers from your own office. The answer to my question, by the way, is 345,807. That's the number of unaccompanied children who have come across the border on your watch. Do you know what's happening to these children? Have you seen this report from the New York Times? Alone and exploited migrant children work brutal jobs across the United States. Have you seen this?
Senator, I have, and let me share with you what we are doing.
Have you seen these numbers? These are reports of trafficking and abuse of migrant children. You can see a massive surge that begins to happen when? When you come to office in 2021. This is from the New York Times. Thousands of children have ended up in punishing jobs across the country, working overnight in slaughterhouses, replacing roofs, operating machinery in factories, all in violation of child labor laws. For example, there's a young girl named Carolina from Guatemala. She is 15 years old. What does she do? She packages Cheerios overnight at a factory. She says, sometimes I get tired and I feel sick. The Times goes on, her stomach often hurt. She was unsure if that was because of a lack of sleep or the stress of the incessant roar of the machines or her own worry. The Times goes on, far from home, many of these children are under intense pressure to earn money. They have to send cash back home to their families while often being in debt to their sponsors, quote unquote. For what? For smuggling fees, rent, and living expenses. One individual interviewed by the Times said this, and I'm still quoting, "It's the new child labor." One 13-year-old forced to wash hotel sheets in Virginia, kids running milking machines in Vermont, delivering meals in New York City, scrubbing dishes late at night, all in violation of our country's laws. That huge surge of kids across the border because you changed Title 42, when it became an optics crisis, what did you do? You began pressuring officials and agencies to skip the vetting process and get these kids out as soon as possible to sponsors who weren't vetted. Here's the Times again. As shelters filled with children, the administration began loosening vetting restrictions and urging case managers to speed the process along. You have at every stage facilitated this modern-day indentured servitude of minor children. Why should you not be impeached for this?
Senator, I look forward to discussing this issue further because you are misstating the facts.
For migrant children coming to the U.S. is also one of the most hazardous, roofing and construction, despite federal law prohibiting anyone under 18 from doing so.
Children work at night and the auditors come in the morning. Children work with fake IDs. The auditors are checking paperwork, not actually speaking with children.
Hay un pasillo grande después de mi línea, es la última, y pasaban y sí miraba unos que tenían menos edad.
Is the work dangerous?
Yo digo que sí, porque pues si para uno es peligroso, para uno que tiene edad, pues ahora para ellos más. De ir cuando lavan, pues, ahí se habían dado cuenta ellos.
Shannon Rebelledo is a 17-year Labor Department investigator. She went to Grand Island, Nebraska last summer after a middle school told police about acid burns on the hand and knee of a 14-year-old girl. The student explained that she worked nights in this slaughterhouse on the edge of town. Each night, the plant was turned over to PSSI for cleaning from 11 to 7 a.m.
They know, but they don't say nothing because just need the people to get the job done.
People to get the job done. Jessica Lima told us turnover of workers was high. In Grand Island, many are at fault. A mother was sentenced to 60 days.
There's a lot of blame.
And in this audio recording, a stepfather is being sentenced to 30 days by Judge Arthur Wetzel.
Obviously, the company that employed this young lady has substantial blame. There's blame to be passed upon the mother who obtained the false documents so her child could work.
Did the Know Your Rights presentation help them in those situations?
Senator ORR.
That's a yes or no, I think. Do you really think that you're helping these children by releasing them to labor traffickers and, yes, sex traffickers? 85,000 children whom you have no contact with, and your answer is we gave them a presentation before we turned them over to these people who are exploiting them on a scale not seen in this country for 100 years, a century. A century. It's a disgrace in the United States of America.
Senator, we have a thorough vetting process.
Do you require sponsors to document their relationship with the child?
Yes, we go through.
No, you do not. You do not. Have you read the Senate's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations reports on your office? There was one in 2016. There was one in 2018. There was one in 2020. There was one in 2022. Spanning administrations, what they found is you do not require sponsors to document their relationship with the child. You release them anyway. What about background checks? Do you require background checks on all adults in the household?
In cases where the child is being released to their parents, we do not require background checks. But Senator, I would
Do you
really
require
like
background checks on all adults in the household in any case?
Yes, in some cases we do.
What percentage of cases do you do background checks on the adults in the household?
I don't have that number in front of me.
Do you do home visits in all cases? You can actually see where these children are being released, whose care you're putting them in?
We do not do home visits in all cases. Senator, I'd really like the opportunity to talk about what we are doing.
I know what you're doing, and it's incredibly and totally inadequate. And we can read about it in the New York Times. Since you say you've read it, let's talk a little bit about that New York Times report if we could. Here's a quote from the April 17th installment. Again and again, veteran government staffers and outside contractors told HHS, including reports that reached the secretary, that children appeared to be at risk. Did you warn the secretary that children were at risk?
Senator, I'm in regular contact with the secretary.
Did you warn him that children were at risk?
Safety and well-being of children is our top priority.
Did you warn him that children were at risk?
I'm not going to get into the conversations I've had.
You're here and you're under oath, and this is an oversight hearing, and we need to know what you're doing because you're manifestly not doing your job. Did you warn him that children were at risk? Do you believe that children are at risk? Let's start with that.
Yes.
Okay, did you warn the secretary?
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics of my conversation, but I would like the opportunity
Why wouldn't you warn the secretary that children were at risk?
I would like the opportunity to talk about what we
Let's
are
look at what the
doing.
secretary said to you. At least 5 HHS staff members said they were pushed out after raising concerns about child safety. Mr. Becerra, that's the secretary, told the ORR director, that's you, right, that if she could not increase the number of discharges, he would find someone who could. And then he went on to say that if Henry Ford had run his plants like this, he would never have become famous and rich. This is not the way you do an assembly line.
These are the faces of migrant runaways. Children who came across the southern border alone were placed by the U.S. government with an adult sponsor and then vanished. Each of these children disappeared from the small town of Culpeper, Virginia.
Within 30 days tops, a couple days sometimes, and then the child just picks up and leaves.
The sponsors be doing more to keep the kids safe in their homes?
I don't know that there's much that they can do. Basically, they are told by the parent back home, that's not what they went there for. You know, they didn't go there to go to school, they went there to work. You know, they didn't go there to go to school, they went there to work. You know, they didn't go there to go to school, they went there to work.
My goal is to inspire action to safeguard the lives of migrant children, including the staggering 85,000 that are missing. Today, children will work overnight shifts at slaughterhouses, factories, restaurants to pay their debts to smugglers and traffickers. Today, children will be sold for sex. Today, children will call a hotline to report they are being abused, neglected, and trafficked, and we don't know if they're going to get the help they need. For nearly a decade, unaccompanied children have been suffering in the shadows. And I have to confess, I knew nothing about their suffering until 2021, when I volunteered to help the Biden administration with the crisis at the southern border. As part of Operation Artemis, I was deployed to the Pomona Fairplex Emergency Intake Site in California to help HHS, Office of Refugee Resettlement, reunite children with sponsors in the United States. I thought I was going to help place children in loving homes. Instead, I discovered that children are being trafficked through a sophisticated network that begins with recruiting in home country, smuggling to the U.S. border, and ends when ORR delivers a child to a sponsor. Some sponsors are criminals and traffickers and members of transnational criminal organizations. Some sponsors view children as commodities and assets to be used for earning income. This is why we are witnessing an explosion of labor trafficking. Now, whether it's intentional or not, it could be argued that the United States government has become the middleman in a large-scale, multi-billion-dollar child trafficking operation that is run by bad actors seeking to profit off of the lives of children. As for me, my interest is the safety of the children. So I want to tell you some of what I witnessed personally at the Pomona Fairplex. I saw vulnerable indigenous children from Guatemala who speak Mayan dialects and cannot speak Spanish. That means they cannot ask for help in English, they cannot ask for help in Spanish. They become captives of their sponsors. I have sat with case managers as they've cried to tell me the horror of what has happened to children as they make the journey to this country. I saw apartment buildings where 20, 30, and 40 unaccompanied minors have been released. I saw sponsors trying to simultaneously sponsor children from multiple ORR sites at one time. I saw sponsors using multiple addresses to obtain sponsorships of children. And I saw numerous cases of children in debt bondage, and the child knew they had to stay with the sponsor until the debt was paid. Realizing that we were not offering the children the American dream, but instead putting them in modern-day slavery with wicked overlords, was a terrible revelation. A terrible revelation. These children are a captive victim population with no access to law enforcement or knowledge of their rights. They are extorted, abused, neglected. And that is why I blew the whistle in 2021.
Alejandro Mayorkas said repeatedly at the beginning and throughout his tenure as Secretary of Homeland Security that he would not send back unaccompanied minors. What did that tell parents, teenagers, and smugglers seeking to line their pockets? That this administration was opening the door wide open for unaccompanied minors to enter and stay in the U.S. And the parents, teens, and smugglers around the world heard it loud and clear. A historic 366,000 unaccompanied minors have been encountered just on the southwest border so far under the Biden administration. For those who closely follow border security, border data is tracked month by month. Yet after 28 months of record entry of unaccompanied minors, the Biden administration has not changed its policies to prevent such minors from coming here. Instead, the administration's response has been, get them in faster. Furthermore, MS-13 and other gang members, who are often teenagers, easily enter the U.S. as unaccompanied minors. Too many Americans and migrants have needlessly died at the hands of vicious gang members who were released into our communities. The Biden administration has also recently made the nonsensical decision to stop using DNA testing of suspected fake families at the border. The results are very predictable: a return to more child smuggling, child recycling, and trafficking. Say you're a family, and we'll take your word for it.
Take a look at these numbers. I mean, it's just think about this. A little kid, maybe 8, 9 years old, who came along and went through Central America, through Mexico, seeing horrendous conditions, and then all of a sudden is taken in front of a judge in a language they don't know, in an environment they don't know. They don't have anybody they know along with them, and they're expected to fight their case for asylum in the United States.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Immigration Judge William Snoffer, sitting in the Immigration Court in Portland, Oregon. These are removal proceedings in the matter of Lisa Gonzalez. The respondent is present in court, but without an attorney. For the government this morning, Mr. Shore is appearing on behalf of the Office of Chief Counsel. Also present here in court is the Spanish translator. Now, to the respondent, do you speak and understand Spanish?
Sí.
Do you want this hearing conducted in Spanish?
Sí.
Are you a little nervous this morning? See? Do you understand what these proceedings here in court are all about? Do you know what a lawyer is? No? Do you have a lawyer? No?
The content for 15 Million Migrants Later reached 5 hours, so I'm splitting it up into 2.5-hour episodes and 30-minute chapters for those of you who prefer a shorter format. Click the like button and subscribe to stay updated on episode 2 and its chapters. Thanks for watching.